Hi, family. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Gold Corner. For those that don't know me, my name is Joel Ojeda, and I'm the creator of the nonprofit organization, as well as a YouTube channel called the Gold Corner. This is a channel that I created in memory of my 2-year-old daughter, Mia, who battled neuroblastoma and was called home in 2018. And this is just a platform where us as parents can come and speak about these warriors. Welcome to the Gold Corner. Let's do this.
And now it's time for the main event. This is the moment you have all been waiting for. In memory of Mia Ojeda. Dedicated to all the brave little warriors that have fought and the ones that are currently fighting childhood cancer. For the thousands watching around the world, fighting out of the Gold Corner, it's time!
This week, we have another amazing story. I had the opportunity to follow the Team Blake page on social media for a while. And we have from Topeka, Kansas here, we have Jaclyn. And Jaclyn is Blake's mother, and she's going to be talking to us about Warrior Blake, everything that he went through, and just his story from the beginning. So Jaclyn, thank you so much for being here, for being a part of the Gold Corner. We can't wait to hear Team Blake story, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joel, for having me to talk about our son. I'll start with his story. Our son, Blake Cazier, was diagnosed with cancer a few days after his first birthday. Now, a month before that even happened, Blake had touched a wood-burning stove while Grandma was watching, and we were having to go have his hands debrided because he had these bad third-degree burns in some areas. And so for about a month, we were going up to Kansas City because we're from Topeka. It's about an hour away, to have treatment there for his hands. And he just wasn't the same. He was uncomfortable. He was having pain medication, but he started having like these night sweats. And I thought it was, all from the trauma to his hands, the inflammation or whatnot. And he started waking up a lot at night screaming in pain. But so we just kept taking him in, and right before Christmas, they finally diagnosed him with an ear infection right before Christmas. And he had been on an antibiotic for over 24 hours, and he was still having fevers. And I was like, something's not right. Something's not right, And my sister ended up having a baby on the 26th of December. And we had came home from all of the day's activities. It was a wild day with family pictures and all kinds of stuff. But came home and I unwrapped his hands, and I was like, I think his hands are infected. I've got to take him to the hospital. So I packed my bags, not knowing, and took him in that night. It was also my daughter's, it would have been her third birthday. It's my daughter's third birthday. And we got labs done, and they said, we're going to keep you all night. He has cellulitis, which is like an infection of his hands. So we were there for over 24 hours, and I had been an ICU nurse for 8 years at that time. I was just PRN because I was home taking care of my babies. So I worked as needed, but I was asking for his labs, and I just thought it was so strange because nobody could tell me. And I knew that the labs were drawn, and like everybody was avoiding the situation. And I was like, I'm so angry right now. He's been on these IV antibiotics for over 24 hours. He's still having these fevers. What is going on? Like, something is going on. And I remember telling my mom this before they came in. And I was like, something's not right, you know, like he should be breaking these fevers. And she went downstairs to grab a coffee real quick because it had been a long couple days. And my husband does snow removal, so he was out pushing snow. Hadn't seen him for a couple days, so it was just my mom and Blake and I in the hospital. And my mom was going back and forth between the hospitals to see my sister's baby and see our son. So she was juggling that, but she went down to grab a coffee real quick. And it was at that moment that there was a whole team of doctors that came in. And I just knew he was not okay. And I just remember grabbing him and being like, God, not my baby. And I was sitting in the crib with him and I'm just screaming, holding him, God, not my baby. And I don't even know what they said except for he had cancer. And then for some reason, I just knew that he was not going to be okay. And we didn't know what type of leukemia he had, but he had leukemia. And it wasn't till like the next day that we found out he had a very aggressive leukemia that usually happens with older people. It's acute myeloid leukemia. It is very aggressive. So your treatment is like you're in the hospital for a month and you're just like knocking your immune system down, trying to kill these cancer cells. And then once your numbers start to come back up is when you get to go home. So we would be home for literally a week and then go back in for a month. And we had 3 other children at home. So you could imagine what that did to our family. But we immediately started treatment here and in Topeka, Kansas. And that's when, you know, we realized that there was so much more to what type of cancer this was. They had to figure out genetics and if he was going to need a bone marrow transplant. And I was like, wow, this is a lot. You know, I remember learning about cancers, but I don't remember it being, never remember learning about acute myeloid leukemia when I was in nursing school. Never remembered that. So we did start the treatment and his chances were fair, you know, at that time. And that was December 26th of 2016. So then it wasn't till March we came in and we were like, wow, we're doing great. You know, he was in remission and, you know, we've got this, we got to keep going. And it was in March when we came in for our routine 1-month stay, and they come in and they, you know, inject chemo through the spinal column, and they pull out to make sure that there's no cancer cells in there. And it was just a normal 1-month stay, and the doctor came up. And I remember hearing that there was a high white blood count in his spinal fluid. And I didn't really think of it until she came up and she's like, where's your other little one? Because my daughter, Kendall, who was 3 at that time, was visiting. And I said, oh, she's playing in the toy room with, you know, she's like, come here, you know, and brought us in the room, the consultation room. That's the bad room. You know, you're going to get bad news when you go in there. You just know it. And I was like, what's going on? And she's like, I have bad news. And I was like, oh no, you know, like he's got an infection in his spinal column. Cause I was like thinking back to what the labs were. And she's like, no, it's far worse than that. And that's when she had told me that he had relapsed in his spinal column, the fluid in his spinal column. He had not relapsed in his bone marrow, and that's what's like leukemia. That's where the cells are. They are being made in the bone marrow and they go throughout the blood. So it was only in his spinal fluid, which made things way more difficult. His chances at survival rate were 15% then. And that's when we'd only been fighting for a few months. And that's when the doctor said, do you want to continue? And I was like, what do you mean, do you want to continue? Like, he's one. And so of course my husband and I were like, of course, yes, we do want to continue. And our treatment changed a little bit, but we stayed there in Topeka because it was the same treatment, was universal, that they use anywhere else. And that's when my husband and I started to realize that these kids are getting the same drugs that they were 30 years ago, and nothing's really changed. And that's when we were looking into they were trying to get different drugs that might help because of the gene that Blake had. This trial drug was going to attack the specific protein that was on these cells. Well, I was like, well, that's great. He has this CD33, that let's do that. Well, we couldn't get it. We were denied this treatment. And that's when I was like, how can he be denied something that might save his life? And that's when I realized that things weren't, started realizing that childhood cancer was very underfunded. The research was very underfunded. And I still to this day cannot understand how any child can be denied a medication that might save their life. So we started doing the same chemotherapy, but we needed to put more chemo in his spinal fluid for it to clear up. So we did do that. And like the doctor best described, because I was like, I don't understand, he's in remission, She's like, the best way I can describe is if you shake up a pop bottle and you open it and it explodes, you'll clean up the pop that's everywhere on your walls, on your door, on your floor. But here in a month, you'll be like cleaning up something. You'll be like, oh, there's that speck of pop because that cancer cell was like hidden. And it hides everywhere. It just hides everywhere. And it's just like, they're so smart. It's so smart. And that's what it was doing to our little Blakey. So then we went on, we were in remission again in July. It was July 4th because we like to celebrate July 4th. And my husband never really took Blake in. It was always me. But that day he wanted to take Blake in because Blake needed blood, which was weird why Blake would need blood if we weren't having chemo, because chemo was what dropped your blood. But also if the cancer was coming back, it dropped your blood because the cancer cells would take over your good cells, which would be your blood cells. So he needed a transfusion, and the doctor's like, where's Jaclyn? He's like, oh, she's at home with the other ones, trying to make a dish because we don't ever get to go do anything. We were trying to be with family for 4th of July. And she's like, oh, okay. Well, then I went in the next week and went into clinic before we were going to go in for our next month. And that's when she started, let's go over this bone marrow biopsy we did, to see where we're at. And I remember sitting in there because I was completely blindsided. I had no idea. And I was holding Blake, and she was telling me that the cancer was back in his bone marrow. And I just remember getting so hot and just feeling like I was going to pass out. And I was just like, how is this happening again? What are we going to do? And then that's when she's like, I've been talking to Children's Mercy, which is Kansas City, about an hour away. And they're going to take your case, and you're going to need a bone marrow transplant. So that was, it was just a blow. We were already struggling with living in a hospital, but at least our family was there to come visit us at least. But then it was a whole new world that we were going to be doing, living an hour away and being away from our children and our families. So we went up there so we could try to get back in remission. They wanted him back in remission before we could do the bone marrow transplant. And we received, it was the trial med that they had used previously, but they said that it could be very hard on the liver. And with transplants, they can be very hard on the liver, which kids can get VOD, and that could cause them to die just from the transplant itself. And VOD, it's where your vessels in your liver become sluggish, and the blood can't flow, and your abdomen just continues to grow, and everything compresses, and children end up dying from this. So that was scary, but we had to get him in remission. So we did get him in remission, and we went through all this stuff. You have to go through all this labs and whatnot before you go into transplant. So he's now 1.5 years, and we were doing all this in into July, August. And his transplant was scheduled for beginning of September. So this is where they do all your labs. They try to match you. They were, getting blood from my husband and I, and from our daughter. That was probably the most emotional thing, that our daughter could maybe save his life, watching her give her blood to see if she could be a match. And they ended up having 250 matches for Blake, which was unreal. They said 250 matches like that. These people could save his life. Unheard of, that many, And I was like, oh, this, my husband and I, like, this is faith. Like, it has to be like that. Why would they have that many matches? Like, why would this is going to go well? And we had a whole new team, and they pretty much told us it was 50-50 chance whether it would work. And then they check his heart to make sure he's well enough. And they would check his liver to make sure he's well enough. And I remember them doing hearing tests on him. And this is kind of like when I started my grief for Blake, because he was losing his hearing from all the chemotherapy. And they told me that he would never be able to have children. That was really hard. And I started grieving then, because when we were first diagnosed, the doctor told me, because she didn't know what type of leukemia it was that day, but she told me that I was going to be able to watch him graduate. And I was going to be able to walk him down the aisle when he got married and dance with him at his wedding. And I was going to be able to hold his babies. And that everything was going to be okay. And then I had these doctors telling me that he was never going to be able to have babies, which was really hard. But we were like, you know what, we'll handle that later on. So we started the transplant, and it was just the amount of money that you have to spend on this isn't real. Just for his cells to be flown from another place to us. And it wasn't even like to be infused into him or anything like that, or the doctors caring for him, but just the flight of the cells to be flown to him was $250,000. But so on, once we started the transplant, they give you just the nastiest chemo in the entire world. Like, they just warn you about how the sores, like, because it's just taking all the cells from everywhere, like the inner of your mouth, the lining of your mouth, all the way down your stomach, all the way everywhere. So they prepared us for all of that. And then they give you the cells. Once they give you a week of chemo, they give you the cells, and they tell you happy new birthday, because it's hopefully going to be your new life. And Blake did well. It wasn't a week till a week after that he started feeling very yucky. The sores were in his mouth. He just laid there. And then his stomach started growing. And I was like, he's got VOD. I just know it. And I remember I knew too much because I was a nurse, but I was thankful because I saved his life a lot of times during this time that we battled. But I remember arguing with the doctor. And I said, my son has VOD. He's like, no, we checked the labs, And I was like, no, I know he's got VOD. And it was either the next day or 2 days later, he comes in and he was like, and you could tell he was like, it was hard for him to swallow his pride. But he was like, your son has VOD. And I said, I told you. And I was so mad because you have to give him a medication, but the medication takes a long time to work, like weeks to work. And he might not have weeks the more you wait, because those cells or the vessels just close off. And I just remember being so upset because I just knew. I mean, a mother's instinct is very strong. Don't ever question it. So that was another knockdown for us. But Blake did overcome that. It was a long road. And I'll never forget like the first time he stood up after having that, because all he did was lay down and I would just hold him. And he was so miserable. And every day they made you go sit in your bathroom because they had to clean the room, and they clean these rooms vigorously because the kids have no immune system. And it was so painful just for me to hold him with all this stuff because his belly was so big. I have photographs of us, in the bathroom having our daily cleaning. But he did well and overcame that. And we had been in a hospital room. I was able to walk out. Blake was not. He was in that hospital room, 4 walls, for over 100 days, one room. That's all he saw. He would see kids in the hallway walk, or maybe they'd be being pushed on a truck, and he just didn't understand, like, why can't I go ride that truck, or So that was very hard because he couldn't ever leave his room. Well, we were able to go live across the street at Ronald McDonald House. They were a huge blessing to our family. They have like 3 of them over there by the hospital. And it was end of October, because I remember celebrating Halloween there. But it was end of October that we got to leave and go live in our new home. And boy, we made a lot of memories there. Him and I did. And our family, like our kids, could come up and stay with us, and we could have meals there, and it was amazing. And they didn't want me to take him anywhere because he had no immune system, but I would walk him down to the park and swing him because he never got to do that. He was 1 and learning to walk, pushing an IV pole. I felt like I needed to give him the best life I could as a toddler. I mean, because they're not supposed to be locked up like that. They're supposed to be playing. That's what kids want to do. All they care about is to go play. And all Blake cared about was his siblings. He loved his brothers and sisters. Anytime that they came, his face would just light up. So we made a lot of good memories there at Ronald McDonald Houses. And it was right before Thanksgiving. They said, you want to go home? And I was like, what? Like, we get to go home? And they're like, yeah, everything looks great. And he had his 100-day bone marrow biopsy right before Christmas. And I was so anxious. I was like, we need to do this because I need to know if our holidays are going to be terrible again, or, like I just kept feeling like his cancer was back. I don't know why, but I don't know if it was just like the fear that you have. You're always living in fear, always, because, if it's not the cancer that's coming back, it's something else with these children, some kind of infection, I can't even tell you how many infections he had. Like it was always something. However, so we went home right before Thanksgiving, and then we got to celebrate his second birthday. He turned 2, December 23rd. We got to celebrate Christmas at home, and my daughter's birthday, which would have been his diagnosis day, was the day after Christmas, so that had been a year. And it was all just so surreal. It was strange, but it was happy time. It was happy. We were so happy to be home, so hopeful. Blake started waking up a lot, and I kept saying, like, and everyone's like, no, his bone marrow came back and there's no cancer, right before Christmas, there's no cancer. And he just, I don't know, I just felt it. So that was right before Christmas that we had it. January 9th, I took him in for his labs. And it was taking a long time. And I took my daughter with me because I was like, oh, it's just labs, And she never got to go with us. And I just wanted to spend time. I didn't have a daughter for a year, So she came with us, and it was just taking forever. And I just remember getting very like, what is taking so long? And the nurse comes in, and the bone marrow doctor comes in, and they're like, And I'm like, I know what? He's like, because I just felt it. And I just remember the room getting hot, and I was like, they said it was back, and I literally felt like I was about to pass out because I couldn't believe it was happening again. And I knew there was really no more options. I mean, they even had to bring a fan in, and I couldn't even process it because I was alone. I didn't have like my husband there to help me like understand what was going on, or my mom, or and I just remember walking out and I saw his other doctor. I gave him a hug, just walked out, and I remember walking in that garage, the parking garage, and just telling him I was so sorry. I was like, I'm so sorry, Blake. Mommy can't fix it. My daughter kept just saying, Mommy, are you okay? Are you sad? And that was a long drive home. And I just remember I was all holding Blake, like my mom, my husband, and they told me to increase his fluids that night, and I did, and he hadn't gone pee. I knew that the cancer cells were just all over. So I took him into the ER later that night. My mom and I drove him up. It was actually early morning. And they admitted him because that many cancer cells is dangerous, and these kids have strokes. So, and the doctor's like, well, what made you change your mind that you wanted to treat him again? And I was like, I didn't even have time to process like what was even going on. I didn't even know what the next step was, because I just got told that my son was dying again. And so we focused on trying to find a trial medication. And they had one at Children's Mercy, and it was for the CPX medication. They had one that summer when we came in that was open at Children's Mercy. Well, now that it was closed, so he couldn't do that trial because it was closed. But they had this same trial in Cincinnati. I just remember being like, I knew Blake's faith. I just knew it. And my mom and my husband were like, we have to try. I was like, it is like way less than 10% that he could even survive. And then they just kept saying, well, somebody has to be in that 10%. And so we were off to the next place. And I remember going home. We didn't know when I was going to leave or anything. I had no idea. So I ran home, about an hour drive to go pack. I was going to get on a plane with him, a medical plane with him to Cincinnati. And I just remember crying and like yelling at God because I was so scared. I was so scared that we were going to be alone in a strange city, and just I was fighting for his life. And we boarded that plane and we flew, and it wasn't about less than 24 hours that my husband ended up flying a plane and getting there, but it was very scary. It's very scary to be in a place that you don't know anybody. So they started this trial on him, and it seemed to be working. You know, like he was getting, the leukemia was in his skin. So it was like, I kept saying, what is this rash, like before he relapsed? And they thought it was from this graft, GVD, which is graft versus host. You know, you want the new cells to kind of fight your body a little bit, but not a lot, because then you could die from it because your body's not accepting those cells, I guess is the best way to say it. But so you could tell that it was working because, and it was actually a leukemia rash is what it was. So the rash on his skin was going down. And that's when, I'm sorry, we felt like we could breathe a little bit, like this medication might be working. And I had noticed one day, like his blood vessels were like blown in his eyes, and I was telling them that his blood pressure was too high and that he was on a blood pressure medication down at Kansas City, and we needed to get that started again. And I was thinking that his blood vessels were blown because his blood pressure was too high. And I fought to get that blood pressure medication because his blood pressure was too high. Well, it wasn't till a couple of days later, Blake was like in this excruciating pain, and we just couldn't figure it out. And he couldn't even open his eyes, and you could just see it. And there was an ophthalmologist that came in. She was very quiet, and I was just kind of waiting to see what she was going to say. She's like, oh gosh, I hope that's not what it is. I'm like, what's going on, you know? She's like, you don't really see this. She goes, I think the leukemia is in his eyes. And I was like, oh. And so he had eye surgery to aspirate to see if they were cancer cells, and they were. So this poor baby was so uncomfortable because the cancer was in his eyes. So that's when they talked about radiation. There's 2 types of radiation. And at his age, they preferred, you have to be fitted for a mask, which takes like weeks to do. And I can't even tell you what type, proton, or I'm not really sure. I can't remember right now, but which one they would prefer to do on him, but we didn't have time. Because the other one can cause you to have bone deformities because you're still growing so much, your brain is still growing so much. At the age of 1 and almost 2, oh, I guess he was 2. At the age of 2, you know, you're still, they prefer not to do that, but we needed to do something, they said. They said, so your baby will likely be deformed, which was another grief that was really hard to hear. He's just the most beautiful boy I've ever seen. But we wanted to provide him comfort at that point. So we were like, yes, if that's what's going to make him feel better, you know. And they were going in, his pressure in his eyes was so high because of the cancer cells. And it was, he was going to turn blind. You could tell he couldn't see. It's very sad. So it was around that time that he started having problems breathing. And I was telling the doctor, like, I don't really like his breathing. It was like, it's almost like he was like raspy, like hoarse. Well, it was that night that he was really working hard to breathe, really labored. And they had to call the ICU. And I just remember, I mean, he was having to go up on his oxygen like so much. So we took him to the ICU because he needed more oxygen. He needed a really big high flow. Well, it was then that they were like, you know, he's requiring too much. We just need to put a tube down him and intubate him. And I was like, yes, he needs rest. He was so exhausted. You could just see it. You could see it. And I was like, yes, give him the tube and put him to sleep. He needs to rest. So we did. They just couldn't figure out why he was needing to breathe. Well, later on, we found out, like, you know, the cancer was even in his lungs. Like, it was attacking everything. Just taking over everything. So he was on the ventilator for at least a week there. And that's when my husband and I were like, they were trying to get him off the ventilator, and he was doing well. Well, we woke up in the middle of the night to the alarms going off. And he had sat up and the tube had kinked. And blood was just pouring everywhere because of all the cancer. And they ended up coding him. They didn't have to do chest compressions, but they had to assist him. And we got him back, and we just said, we just want to get him home. I just want to get him home. I don't want to be here. I couldn't even think about them flying my baby back after he had passed away and him being alone. So they got us home back to Children's Mercy, which was Kansas City. And we were there for, a week. And they actually got the tube off and he looked great. And we were like, oh, so hopeful. Like, maybe we could actually go home. Like, and we just kept telling him, like, oh, buddy, we're going to get you. Because he loved to ride the golf cart and look for cows. We live out in the country. And I was like, oh, we're going to get to go on that. We called it the go-go. I was like, I'm going to take you home. We're going to go ride on the golf cart. God had different plans. Um, he was going backwards again. And I don't even think the doctors knew how sick he was. Because I said, I don't want to put him on the ventilator again. I don't want him to be miserable. It's like, I don't want to do it again. So he was needing more oxygen, and it wasn't like, it was that night that I finally told my husband, I said, it's time. He was screaming and in so much pain. Because he had a huge mask on and it was blowing air in him. And I will never forget the time. It's 3 a.m. And I called my mom and I said, because she was staying at Ronald McDonald across the street, I said, come here. And I told my mom that it was time. And so we called our family. And they all drove up to be with us. My mom didn't even tell my dad and sister what was going on because she didn't think that they could handle it. So they didn't even know until they walked in the room and they saw what was happening. He was surrounded by his parents, his grandparents, and aunts and uncles, not our children. It was too much. They were too young. But we were all holding him when he took his last breath. And I'll never forget walking out of those hospital doors without my baby. And then, like, it was 15 months that we battled. And during that 15 months, I didn't want to explain to, like, 100 people the same story of what was going on with Blake during his treatment. So I started a Facebook page. And my husband had shirts made. And we called it Team Blake. And the shirts on the back say what cancer can't do. And it says, you know, cancer can't suppress memories. It can't take away, you know, love and all the things that cancer can't do. So everybody started following our page because it was like my journal. Like, it was the way that I coped with everything. I was raw. I was real. I posted lots of Bible scriptures on there. Everyone could relate to this page. And people from all over the world were following our page and praying for our son. It was amazing. By the time Blake had passed away, we had over 100,000 people praying for our kid. We had 100,000 people following that page. And when he passed away, it was like the whole world was just grief-stricken. Everybody was just devastated. Everybody thought that Blake was gonna make it. So, at the end, you know, because they don't tell you how expensive cancer is. Like, you know, the financial burden. You got this emotional and physical burden that comes with it, but they don't tell you about the financial burden. So we had the community that just rallied around us. We had people sending Blake care packages all the time of all of his favorite things. Thomas the Train, bubble guppies. They would make capes for him that were Thomas the Train. Just everybody was so thoughtful. And that was like my favorite thing was when he got a package and he just forgot he was sick for just a moment. He was a kid and he would open it up and his face would be like so excited. It was so awesome to see him just happy for a moment and just to forget about all the ouchies. So that was one thing that people did for us. People were making us meals. They were asking to come clean our house. We had family that asked to, they asked to do a golf tournament. And that way we could pay for medical bills. So we got the funds for that. People did a chili feed. They did a walk. So many people did so many things just to help us in any way that they could. So after Blake had passed away, my husband and I, we couldn't just sit there. Like we wanted to give back and help those that were like us. So we went to a lawyer and tried to figure out how we could start a nonprofit. And they told us it's a lot more work than what you think. And I kind of looked at my husband and he was pretty much telling us to take our money and just go. You know, just you were blessed during this time and people were here to help you. And my husband and I were like, no, this isn't the end. We just knew it wasn't. We wanted Blake's legacy to live on. So we went for it and started a nonprofit. And now we help little kids like Blake. One of the first things that we did do, because I was just so angry, I teamed up with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society to raise funds for childhood cancer. But what I learned through that was I didn't realize that they, a lot of it went to adults. And if I wanted the money to go where I wanted it to go, I had to raise over $50,000. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. And, then you start hearing like, oh, well, they pay their employees go on vacation, or, and I'm like, no wonder our research is so, poorly funded. I can't believe that people give these organizations money thinking that they're going to these causes, and they're not. Not all of it, I guess. So I was like, yeah, I am going to make that $50,000, and it's going to go to childhood cancer. And we did. It was the craziest year after Blake had died. Like, I can't even believe that I did it. I don't even know how I did. And I think that's how I made it the first year, because I was so busy. But I got to put Blake's name on it, and it went, I think it was in Texas, to childhood cancer research. So all that money did go to children. That was one of the biggest things I ever done with my life. So then we started our nonprofit, and one of our biggest events is a golf tournament, just like our family did for us. So every year we have it. But what we do, we help children just like Blake, and they don't even all have to have cancer, because there's a lot of children out there with life-threatening illnesses that need help. And so our goal is to take any financial burden off of these parents, so they can focus on what's important the most, and that's their child, whether they have many years with them or just weeks or whatever. We want to provide relief so they can focus on their child, what time they have with them. Because people did that for us, and it was more than the wait. It was just amazing. That's time that we can't ever get back, and we're very fortunate and grateful for everybody that helped us, that gave us those extra moments with Blake so we could be with him. So we do that. We help children in Northeast Kansas, but we also send care packages to children all over the world that are maybe newly diagnosed, or maybe they're being sent home on hospice, or something like that. We do that, which if we could put a smile on their face, that's what we want to do, because I remember how important it was for Blake. But yeah, we provide any kind of, it doesn't have to be hospital bills. It could be, your rent, your cell phone. A lot of times one parent's with the kid and the other parent's working. The pandemic changed a lot. We had a lot more, people needed a lot of help during the pandemic. That's when we saw a lot of people reach out to us. So Blake's legacy still lives on, and we're still, it's been 5 years. We just celebrated his 5-year angelversary, however you want to call it. Yeah, I can't believe it's been 5 years. It's crazy to think that. It's crazy to think that we've survived these 5 years.
It's one of these things that you look back and it's been so long ago, but then it seems like it was just yesterday,
Oh yeah.
and it's extremely difficult, where for me it's been, going on 4 years, and now, both Blake and Mia have been gone more than they were actually here on Earth. And that
Yeah.
is and that is crazy, that to even think that, and how you say it, how we have survived what we've gone through, and just to touch on a lot of the things that you were talking, and a lot of the things, it really hit home, because the same thing with us in Fort Worth, with the Ronald McDonald House right across the street, from the hospital, and that's what, in all of our episodes, we touch on that, of the lack
Yeah.
of funding for childhood cancer, which is 4% that we're getting. 4 pennies out of every dollar
Yeah.
is what's going to our children. And that is why, when we come to that end of the road, the doctors are saying we can't do anything else. We don't know what else to do, or we've done everything, because they're running out of options.
Yeah.
And one thing that upsets me, and this is something that I say in every episode, is how our government is sending millions and billions of dollars outside of the US for dumb things, when our children here in our beautiful country are dying because of the lack of funding that there is. um so yeah, it's ridiculous. And you also mentioned, and yeah, the last time that they did anything for chemo for children was 1982. So we're talking
Yeah.
about 40-year-old chemo that our children are getting,
Yeah.
because other than that, they're getting adult chemo, just at a lower dose. And
Right.
that is what's kind of killing everything, and killing our children
Yeah.
ultimately, all that poison that's being pumped in.
Yeah.
And now,
Children are different than adults. They need to be treated different than adults.
yeah,
And they're not.
and they're saying it's rare. And
It's not.
yeah, it's not. And again, we didn't have that knowledge, right? I mean, we were not cancer parents until they told us your child has cancer. At
Yeah.
that point, our eyes were opened up to a whole new world that we didn't know we existed. But within that same wall, we do have, like you were mentioning, great organizations that come together and put a smile on a child with the simplest things, with a care package, with this, with that. And that is where the Gold Corner kind of came also about, because we had a lot of great people that would help us, and would help us pay bills and do all that. So that's what we wanted to do also. And I think that what you're doing is amazing also, in everything that you've done for his legacy to continue, and for people to continue to hear his story. And that is the reason why I created this page, because unfortunately, out there, they'll show commercials of kids with cancer, or they'll show this, but they only show the nice part about it, right? The little bald kids smiling and laughing. When I created this, I said to the parents, such as, like I told you, just give it to us real, give it to us, so
Uh-huh.
our viewers can see. And I've had so many viewers reach out to me and say, Joel, we didn't know that this is what was childhood cancer. We didn't know, we were not aware. And that's why I wanted to, because we need to speak about our children, and we need to speak about everything that they're having to go through.
Mm.
And you did mention your page that you have, and that's the Forever Team
Uh,
Blake page, correct? Is that where
yeah,
people can get a hold of you?
you can follow us on our Facebook page. We actually have two, because people look at us as Team Blake, or Team Blake Foundation. But if people want to get a hold of us, they can message us on Facebook, of course. But we have a website that is foreverteamblake.com, and that's where people can apply for applications, and they can kind of see our story and see what we do as well.
And you also have
But
there where people can donate as well, correct?
yeah, yes, they can donate on there as well. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so for our viewers, if you're a business owner or God has blessed you in any way and you want to be a blessing to other people, look up. I'm going to be leaving all the links here to where you can get a hold of Jaclyn and her amazing organization. If you want to sponsor a care package, if you want to do something that will help bring a smile and help parents that are going through this thing that both Jaclyn and her family and my family went through, you can reach out to them there. Jaclyn, I just again I did follow the page and I had been following the page, and just to be able to hear the story from you like this firsthand, just thank you so much. Thank you. I know it's a struggle. I know that
Yeah.
every day is a struggle, and one thing that when a child is diagnosed, the entire family fights, not just the child, the entire family. And one thing that I do want to touch on, and one thing that I cannot relate, because Mia was my only and continues to be my only child, but how has this affected Blake's siblings? Is there anything that other parents that are going through the same thing that might have other children, something that has helped you along the way with your other children?
Our other children, like during that whole 15 months, they didn't even live at home unless we were home for that week. My husband had his own business and he was working, and the kids were going back and forth between grandparents. But when we came home that day to tell them that Blake was not coming home, we had 2 5-year-olds in kindergarten. They were my husband's. And then 1 4-year-old. She wasn't in kindergarten yet. 2 of them, I don't think really knew. But one of them, I'll never forget his face when I told him. And it was like the grief in his face. It was just like, how can a 5-year-old feel that? But they, our children, our daughters, everybody always says she's an old soul, isn't she, when they meet her? And I'm like, yeah, she had to grow up way too fast. But she is an old soul. And, it's been, our kids have always included Blake in playing. Because whenever they play, oh, this is Blakey's, or, and it's still like that. And they're now, 2 of them are going to be 11, and our daughter just turned 9 in December. But it wasn't till this year that around right before March 7th is when he passed away of 2017. My daughter was having a hard time, and she is grieving now. And the 4-year-old that was grieving is different than the 9-year-old that was grieving. She doesn't understand why she's feeling these thoughts, why she's missing him so much, So she's had to have some extra love and counseling. And then one of my boys, he is grieving more than I'd ever seen any of them. And we've been taking out Blake's stuff that I, have packed away and is in boxes, and looking at him and going through them, and he'll be crying, or they've all made Blakey memory boxes recently. But I've had to, the 5-year anniversary was different for me, and I was like consumed in my other children because I was dealing with their grief. So I didn't really get to have my grief this year. I mean, I did, but it was different than all the other. It wasn't about me. It was about my children, which was very, very, very different. But yeah, children, they are resilient, but it's weird when you forget to think about how they're feeling, because you are just so distraught yourself, and you can barely function yourself. It's like, how am I going to take care of someone else? But yeah, it's taken 5 years for our kids to start grieving, like, so we've had to give them some extra love and attention. But the social workers were always good about giving books and stuff to our kids. And Ronald McDonald House was amazing because our kids got to do things there, because they would incorporate, sibling time for them to feel special. And that's one of the things that we like to do too, is like when we send a care package, we'll a lot of times send it to the siblings, because they get forgotten during all of this. I mean, they're like, my daughter didn't live with us for 15 months, and there was a couple times she was in the hospital. I was in Cincinnati in the hospital, and she was in the hospital here for something, and grandma was there. Mommy couldn't be there. And that was one of the most awful things, is not being able to be there for your child. So, but yeah, a lot of times they get forgotten. So we like to try to include them. But you got to think about your other children. Even though it's hard, you have to try.
Right, yeah, because it does really affect them, and you see now 5 years that that Blake's been gone, and they're grieving, and the grief process is something that we're all gonna go through for the rest of our lives. It comes in waves, and it's a cycle, and good days and bad days. Jaclyn, just before we finish this episode, I always ask the parents the same thing, and I'm going to ask you, there's 2 questions here. Number 1, what advice would you give to other parents that are going through the same thing that you're going through right now? What has helped you? What hasn't helped you? What advice would you give them? And the second question is, what advice would you give parents with perfectly healthy children?
What helped me was my faith in God. If I didn't have him, I don't know what I would have done. I had my Bible studies with me. I had my devotional next to me. So when Blake would sleep, I would pick it up. I journaled a lot. I've been able to pick those up, but I can't read them very much because they're very, very raw. But putting it out on paper really helped me, because I would be upset. Sometimes I'd scroll through Facebook and I'd see all these, families with their children outside playing, and I was like, Blake's never been outside in the last, you just find you're feeling sorry for yourself, feeling sorry for, your kid. But journaling was huge for me, and my faith in the Lord. And then for parents that have healthy children, be patient. I still struggle with that sometimes, and I'm like, I always said that I would, because I've got 2 new little ones. Never take for granted the time that you have with children. Be patient. Very patient with your children.
Never take for granted.
You never know.
You never know.
Never.
And as I mentioned earlier, we were not cancer patient parents until we were told we were cancer parents. Prior to that, we didn't really have many cares. Well, Jaclyn, I wanted to say thank you so much for agreeing and being on the episode this week. And to all our viewers, this is us. This is the reality of what childhood cancer is, what cancer has done to our families, what cancer has done to us, to our future. But I am gonna, look at that.
Well, it's got a glare on it, but that's our Bubba.
Beautiful. And one thing that, like you said, the faith that we can rely on is that knowing that we could see our children once again, and we can see them and just as they are, which are healed. So Jaclyn, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I am gonna. Yes, go ahead. Any last words?
God bless you, and God bless Mia, and thank you for inviting me to tell our story.
Of course, it's a real pleasure. We have to speak about these warriors as they are, which are superheroes. And to all our viewers, I am going to be putting the information here in the description where you can get a hold of Jaclyn and her amazing nonprofit organization. Like I said, if you do want to help out, you'll have all the contact information there where you can reach out to them. Thank you so much for tuning in this week to this episode. Remember to pray for your family, pray for your children. Just like Jaclyn was saying, don't take things for granted, because we might never know what God's plan for our lives might be tomorrow. And this is who we are. We're the Gold Corner. We're a broken family, but we're broken together. Remember to live each day to its fullest, because tomorrow's not promised. And just hold on a little while longer, because we're almost home. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.